Hello, students. Today we're going to continue talking about conditional sentences. And we're going to dive into the world of conditional to this time. In my previous video that I posted a few weeks ago, we talked about conditional one. Now, we need to understand the difference between conditional one and conditional two because, as I believe, in the English language, all grammatical constructions, grammatical tenses serve different purposes and they normally do not overlap. So today we're going to focus on conditional two and also we're going to see the difference with conditional one. It will help us understand better when to use conditional two in the English language. Are you guys ready? Let's begin. Let's start with the structure. All conditional sentences have the same structure. Usually it's a long sentence that consists of two sentences. So the first part, the first sentence, is the condition itself that starts with an if, and then the second one is the result. Okay? And usually if you start with a condition and then finish with the result and you write it, you put a comma. Now, we mentioned that you can switch these two sentences. You can start with the result and finish with the condition or the if clause, as they call it. Now, if you write the sentence, you don't need to put a comma in between of these two small sentences in this case. Okay? So the condition and the main clause, the main sentence where we see the result. And we used that one example in that previous video. If I win the lottery, comma, I will buy a car. Now, what about conditional two? Things in conditional two are a little different. So we are going to look at an example from poetry, and you will help me understand when and how to use conditional two. Now we're going to read some poetry together. You will see the lines from this poem on your screen and you can follow along. And as I read it, I have two tasks for you. First of all, help me find 3 examples of conditional to. And if you recognize this poem, please write down in commentaries who you think wrote this poem. So let us read it together. 3 fair ladies, late one night, sat and spun by candlelight. Were our king to marry me, said the eldest of the 3, I would cook and I would bake, oh, what royal feasts I'd make. Said the second of the 3, I would weave a cloth of gold, fair and wondrous to behold. But the youngest of the 3 murmured, if he married me, I would give our king an heir, handsome, brave, beyond compare. At these words their chamber door gently creaked, and lo, before these 3 ladies' very eyes stood their king to their surprise. Did you recognize it? I'm pretty sure you recognized the 3 conditionals. So the first one was, were our king to marry me, I would cook and I would bake. The second girl said, if he married me, I would weave a cloth of gold, fair and wondrous to behold. And the third girl said, if he married me, I would give our king an heir, or a child, right? So what can we notice about the structure of our conditional sentences? Well, in the if part, we use a past tense. Now, when we talked about conditional one, I mentioned that we can use any present tense in the condition part, and we can use any future tense in the result part, right? We had a little more freedom there. Now, in this case, in the if part, we use either past simple or past continuous. So we're limited to these 2 constructions. And in the result part, we use would plus the infinitive, right? Just like we read here. If he married me, past simple, I would give our king an heir. I would do something. I would give my king an heir. So would plus an infinitive without to. Alrighty then, let's remember the example we used when we talked about conditional one. If I win the lottery, I will buy a car. How are we going to change it into the past? Take a look and tell me. If I, past simple, won a lottery, comma, I, we change will into would, buy a car. I would buy a car. Now, some of you might notice that in the first example, we talked about the lottery. Now we're talking about a lottery. I'll get back to that in a few minutes, so don't get upset with me yet. So the idea is that in conditional two, in the if part, we use either past simple or past continuous. And in the result part, we use would plus an infinitive without to. Okay, so the structural part is pretty clear now. Now let's talk about the idea, because every grammatical structure has a certain idea that we're trying to convey with the help of that grammatical structure. So the question is, let's go back to that poem together. So these three young women, what were they doing? They were sitting there, in the evening talking, like any young women do probably. Um, and they were what? They were imagining things. They were dreaming about something. They were talking about something hypothetical. The question is, what is the likelihood that they could marry a king? Well, I'd say it was very low. So probably 0.1% that they would marry a king. Now, this is a fairy tale. So one of the ladies, the youngest one, ended up marrying that one king, but only because it was a fairy tale. But technically speaking, she was just dreaming about something, sharing her dream, thus speaking about something hypothetical, something that is not real. Okay? So this is where we get this main idea from. Whenever you talk about hypothetical situations, you're dreaming about something, you're talking about something that is quite impossible, you use conditional to, right? Okay, so the example from our text here, if my king married me, I would give him a child. So let's compare two structures together. So conditional one, we go back to that initial sentence once again. If I win the lottery, I will buy a house. So we mentioned last time that in that case, you probably are holding a lottery ticket in your hands and you're saying, if I win the lottery, this is why we're using the definite article here. If I win the lottery, I already have a plan. I will buy a car, or I'm going to buy a car, or I'm buying a car. Again, if you want to understand the difference, go back to the first video. So that's why we use the definite article here, because this condition is real. You already have a ticket in your hands. Now, if we change it to conditional to, things change drastically. So you'd say, if I won a lottery, I would buy a car. Now, this suggests that this is a hypothetical situation and you don't have any lottery tickets in your hands whatsoever. And you're saying that the only possibility for you to buy a car is when you win a lottery. But everyone knows that you can never win a big sum of money in any lottery, usually, right? So you're being very hypothetical. This is why we're talking about a lottery, any lottery. If I win a lottery, I would buy a car, you know. But I understand that the likelihood of that is really, really low. It's very hypothetical, nearly impossible. So this is the main difference between conditional one and conditional two. Conditional one is a real conditional sentence. The result is going to happen if you meet this condition. Or conditional two, for instance. This is a hypothetical conditional, an unreal conditional. you understand that the condition itself cannot be met. Thus, there's not going to be any positive result for you. So, technically speaking, it's all about your attitude. Let me give you two more examples. For instance, one person says, well, if I get promoted, I'll throw a big party. So that person is very positive. He knows that there's a big possibility to be promoted. So he's using a real conditional in this case, and he knows what he's going to do in case he gets the promotion. I'll throw a big party. Okay? Now, another person who's a little more pessimistic or realistic, maybe, he would say, if I got promoted, I would throw a big party. So this person doesn't seem to believe that there is a real possibility of him to be promoted at all. So it's all about your attitude. If you are very confident, you know that the likelihood is really, really high, use conditional one. Otherwise, if you're pessimistic or maybe realistic, use conditional two. Let me give you another example. The first person says, if my team win the cup, I'll buy champagne for everybody. So this is probably a really good team that has very good results, and the person is very hopeful about them winning yet again. So he says, if my team win the cup, I'll buy champagne for everybody. If not, then I won't buy it, but I'm hopeful. Now, the other person is realistic or pessimistic. His team hasn't been winning a lot lately, so he'd say, if my team won the cup, I'd buy champagne for everybody, but I'm not going to do it because I know my team is probably not going to win again. Now, let's talk a little more about when and how to use conditional to. Like, what is the idea that you're trying to convey? So we already mentioned that we use conditional to when we talk about impossible situations. Let me give you an example. If I were in London today, I would be able to go to the concert in Hyde Park. Well, I'm not in London, and when I say if I were in London today, it's pretty much impossible for me to just be there at this moment. Or another impossible situation. If I had $1 million, I would give a lot to charity. Sure. So if I had $1 million, if I was a native speaker, I would understand that you are speaking unrealistically. It means you don't have that $1 million. Thus, you cannot give this money to any charity. And one more example. If everyone had clean water to drink, there would be a lot less disease. Again, it's very unrealistic. Unfortunately, not all the people have access to clean water, and thus a lot of people get sick. So we're being unrealistic right here. Something is quite impossible. Now, the next important idea that you can convey using conditional to is giving advice. Now, the construction for giving advice sounds like this. If I were you, I wouldn't do it. Or you can go a little, further. If you're an advanced student, you can say, if I were in your shoes. In other ways, if I were in your situation, if I were in your shoes, I would talk to him. Okay? So now let's talk a little bit about this construction. You might ask, so why I were you? They told us to use I was or he was or she was. Well, in conditional to, historically speaking, you use were in place of was. And specifically in this very construction, if I were you, let's stick to this idea, if I were you. Now, in modern English, it's now possible to use was instead of were, and it's not going to be considered a grammatical mistake. So let's take a look at a few examples. If I were you, I would look for a new place to live. Or, if I were you, I would go back to school and get more qualifications. Again, this advice is kind of detached. You're not being intrusive. You're not telling the person what to do, but you're just saying that, hey, if I was in that situation, I would do something differently, or this is how I would do it. All right. So just giving advice with conditional to. And again, you can use conditional to speaking about unlikely or hypothetical situation. If I were the president, I would go crazy. If I visited China, I would go to the Great Wall there. Okay. So you're speaking hypothetically. So you need to understand that in conditional one, when we use a present tense and a future tense, it actually is a signal that we're being realistic. Now, the past tense and would in conditional two is signaling to us that we are being unrealistic, we're being hypothetical. So it's very important to use the right tenses and not to change them, because it basically will tell us how realistic or unrealistic you are. Okay? And let me give you a couple more examples. Sometimes we don't have to use the whole long sentence because some things can be implied. For instance, you can just ask a question. What would I do without you if you weren't here? What would I do without you? So it's kind of like an exclamation. Or where would I get one at this time of night if I wanted one? Or you can tell somebody, he wouldn't agree if I asked him. I'm not going to ask him, but if I asked him, he wouldn't agree. I just know that. Okay. So again, you're using the past tense here, even though you're talking kind of about a future situation. Like if I asked him tomorrow, he wouldn't agree, because the past tense here does not focus on the past. It focuses on the fact that it's unrealistic. All right. Let's now work on some exercises, and we're going to put these two concepts together: the unrealistic conditional or unreal conditional, and the structure itself. So I'm going to give you a situation, and you have to decide if it's a real situation or an unreal situation for you personally. And we're going to try to build a sentence together, whether conditional one or two, depending on how realistic you are. So, situation number one: you have some free time this week. Are you a busy person or you're snowed under? So, if you are snowed under, meaning you have lots of work and lots of responsibilities, that's very hypothetical. So, what are you going to say? If I had some free time this week, I would go to the movies. I would take a nap. Anything. Now, if it is realistic, it means that you only work a few hours a week. You could say, if I have some free time this week, I will go to the movies. I already have a plan and I'm hopeful that I'm going to be free this week. Now, let me give you another situation. People stop learning foreign languages. Well, it's probably imagined or impossible, at least in the very near future. We all need foreign languages. So we would say, if people stopped, we use the past tense. If people stopped learning foreign languages, what would happen? The world would go crazy, or English teachers would lose their jobs. Okay? It's very hypothetical. People don't take it seriously. All right, one more situation here. Social media becomes boring and people stop using it. Oh, that's impossible for sure. It's very hypothetical, right? So if social media became boring and people what? Past tense, stopped using it, it would be very funny. You see, so we're being very hypothetical here. Okay, and another situation: you go for a ride in a flying car. A flying car, that's very hypothetical, right? So if I, past tense, went for a ride in a flying car, I would be freaking out. I would be freaking out. I would be very, very scared. Okay? So that was exercise number 1. Let's move on to exercise 2. This time I'm going to give you a list of different inventions. I will post them on the slide. And your job would be to determine, like pick a few of them that are likely to be created very soon, likely to be created in the next 20 years, or not likely to ever be created, right? But then you can choose one or two of those inventions and talk about the fact how they could possibly change the world around us. Okay? So here is the list of inventions that we can talk about. And I'm going to give you an example with the mind reading machine. So I'm going to speak hypothetically. So if someone invented this mind reading machine, this is what would happen. Okay. And what I'd like you to do, you just need to go in the past. Even though you're talking about a distant future, a possible future, just use that past tense, this conditional past tenses, right? So let's imagine if we lived in the world with mind reading machines, people wouldn't feel safe. We would have to introduce laws that would control the use of the machines. For example, if someone wanted to use the machine on somebody, they would have to ask them first. Or maybe, if people knew what others were thinking, everyone would be honest and always say what they think. All right. So this is my take on a possibility of using mind reading machines in the future. So as you can see in that little text that I just read to you, we go back into the past in a way. We use past tense constructions. But in our case, since we're speaking hypothetically, since we're using conditional sentences, the past tense is not responsible for the past. It's responsible for the fact that we're speaking unrealistically or hypothetically. Okay? Now, over to you. Take a moment, and if you need to pause the video, you're welcome to do it, but try to pick any of the inventions like a universal translator, time machine, space elevator, something like that, and write a small paragraph using conditional to, using my example from the previous slide. Write your own little story. Like, what if? What if this happened? What if somebody invented this? What would the result be? Okay, take a moment and work on this exercise, please. Very good. Now, another exercise, exercise 3 for you. So in this case, we're going to try to give advice or help people, with their problems. Again, using conditional too, because we're speaking hypothetically. We don't want to be intrusive and force people into doing something. Before we get there, let's remember in the if part and the condition part, we use a past tense, either past simple or past continuous. In the result part, we use would. Well, technically speaking, would is a modal verb. Remember, we mentioned that in the previous video when we spoke about will. So we can change would into could or might, right? Because we can talk about the fact that something is even less likely to happen. Okay? So I'm going to give you a sentence which denotes a problem that somebody has, and you have to come up with a piece of advice for that person using conditional to. Let me give you an example. For instance, someone says, I am not a fan of spicy food. So you could say, if you tried some Indian dishes, you would change your mind. Now, in our case, you would change your mind. You're pretty confident that this would happen. Now, if you're less confident, you can replace would with might or could. If you tried some Indian dishes, you could change your mind. All right? So I'm going to give you a problem. Try to think of a piece of advice on how to deal with a problem using conditional to. Here we go. I don't like waking up early in the morning. Pause the video and think for a moment, and I'll give you my idea. So I don't like waking up early in the morning. If you went to bed earlier, it could be easier for you to get up. Pretty good advice. Now let's go down to B. I struggle with public speaking. Pause the video, think of advice. So, I struggle with public speaking. You wouldn't have to speak in public if you found a different job. Well, if you don't want to speak in public, just do something else. All right, let's get down to C. I'm really sick of how noisy this city is. Put it on pause, think. I'm really sick of how noisy this city is. If I were you, I would move to the country. All right. And the last one, exercising at the gym is boring. Pause and think of advice. So exercising at the gym is boring. Some of you say, yes, it is. Some of you might say, exercising would be more exciting for you if you played team sports. Why not? Okay, and the last exercise for today, you're going to see a sentence, which is technically a question with some words missing. So remembering the rule, the structure, you're going to put the verbs in the right form, okay? And then you can answer this question, okay? So we can have like a virtual conversation with you. So on the next slide, I'm going to post a sentence, then give you the right answers, and then we can talk a little bit, okay? So let's recap. So far, we covered conditional one and conditional two. It's easier if we compare them. It's easier to understand these tenses. So first of all, grammatically speaking, the structure is the same. The only difference is that in conditional one, we use a present tense in the if part and the condition part. And in the result part, we use will or any future tense. And we should remember that this present tense and future tense, they would signify the fact that this is a real conditional. We're talking about a real situation. If I win a lottery, having a ticket in my hand, I will buy a car. I already have a plan and I'm hopeful. Yes. Now, the second conditional has the same structure, but instead of present and future tenses, we use past simple or the past continuous. And then we use would plus an infinitive without to, or instead of would, we can use could or might if we want to lower expectations even more. And the past tense denotes the fact that, hey, this is an unreal, a hypothetical situation, something that is not likely to happen. Oh, I would buy a car if I won a lottery. But I understand that no one ever wins lotteries and I cannot afford a car having won a lottery and stuff, right? So again, remember these two conditionals, try to use them. And again, conditional two are really good icebreakers. You know, if you ask questions in conditional two structure, it's always a nice icebreaker. And if you want to practice your English with your friends, that's what you can do. So I will leave you with a few questions on conditional two for some discussion with somebody at home. Okay, have a great day, and I hope you like the lesson. So please subscribe to my channel and check out some other lessons that I've uploaded. Have a great day.